Well, I've got this big chunk of walnut for the neck. It's 2 inches thick, more or less, 13 or 14 inches wide, a couple of feet long, plenty big enough, but the grain isn't just right to just take a slice off the edge to use for the neck, because I want the grain to run vertically. That's the stiffest way to keep the strings from warping the neck over time. So this is what I've got to do. In order to see the grain, I've got to get through the saw marks and the paint that's on the end of it. I've marked the grain lines, and let's see what we've got here. 28 degrees. I can take a rip cut at 28 degrees and I should be perpendicular to the grain. And then I can square it off from that face and we'll have a piece to start working with. This piece is deep enough so I could just cut the peg head right into this one piece, but if I did that, there's the surface of the peg head, which is only 7/16 of an inch thick. It's going to be short grain across here, which will make it very weak. So what I'm going to do is cut it 20 degrees and then flip that piece around and glue it on. That way there'll be a long glue joint and there'll be long grain in both pieces. That'll be the strongest way to build this joint. My client wanted a walnut neck, and as luck would have it, the piece of walnut that I split out is highly figured. Since it's so hard to see the pencil lines on this black walnut, I'm going to cover it with this low-tack tape so I can put my lines on and see what I'm doing. The low-tack tape has the virtue of not pulling fibers out of the woods when you remove it, unlike sometimes painter's tape and certainly duct tape and that sort of thing. And this is actually made for this sort of stuff. I made that 20-degree cut on the bandsaw. Now I've secured these two pieces on top of each other to the bench. I need to plane this to make sure it's nice and flat and all of the edges are square. I've got a scrap piece under here so I don't mess up this feather joint at the end. I'm able to adjust it for square by where I run this plane, because it's a little higher in the center than it is on the outsides, the way the iron is sharpened. If I want to take more off this side, I slide the plane that way and use my fingers as a guide. And if I want to take more off the other side, I swing it the other way. So it looks pretty good. This old bench is not flat. My scrapboard was flexing, so this end wasn't getting done. So I shimmed it with a little piece of a cedar shingle, and now it's good to go. Mixed up a little bit of West System epoxy, and I have these two pieces securely clamped to a workboard. And I'll get this guy on here to squeeze the glue out at the joint. And that's about all we can do for this until that glue cures, probably tomorrow. I've got the peg head glued onto the neck, but I wanted it a little bit wider, so I've got some more design options. So I've taken the leftover from the head and I'm adding a couple of cheeks pieces on the side. Much of that will be trimmed away later, but it gives me scope for design decisions. I'm using epoxy for these joints because there's really no occasion where they'd ever have to be taken apart. Need to build up the end of this neck so that I've got material for the joint that'll fasten it to the body. It's nothing I ever want to come apart, so I'm using epoxy. For some applications, the 5-minute epoxy is okay, but for something that really needs to last, I prefer to use the West System marine epoxy. A couple of blocks to hold it side to side. Which I'll just lightly tighten. Okay, that'll keep it from sliding. And now that's about all we can do for that. I also glued a piece of veneer on the face of the peg head. Here's the peg head of the Guitulcimer. I used some more of that fancy old maple veneer for a face. Here's the back of the peg head, and here is the arsenal of tools that I used to shape it. We've got a small flexible draw knife, some gouges, rasps, needle file, card scraper, and some sharpening equipment. I'm going to leave the neck square until I get the tenon cut on the end. I might leave it square until I get the fingerboard glued on. You'll notice that the tenon has already been cut on the end of the neck. I'm going to cover that in a future video about the final assembly. Shaping the neck makes a lot of chips and shavings. And dust. And more dust. And even more dust. I raised the grain by lightly dampening the wood and then letting it dry. And now I'm sanding the fuzzies off with 320 grit in preparation for the dye. I'm going to start with dark brown walnut dye. It turns out that this piece of walnut is highly figured, so again this will enhance the figure. But we probably won't see it until after the first sanding. This is also going to have to be filled quite a bit because it's a very porous wood. Now it's starting to show a little bit. Time for the second coat of dark brown. Well, I've done 2 coats of the dark brown and then a coat of the reddish brown with a little dash of that cherry red in there. The figure won't be as evident as it is on the body because it's a darker color, but it's still going to look pretty nice. I've decided I really like the results I'm getting with this wood dye. It comes as a powder in many different colors. You can dissolve it in either water or alcohol. I've been using water because I have more of it. Well, there's not much left to do on the Guitulcimer. I've got to fit the neck to the body, add the bridge, the nut, the saddle, and the final setup. Oh yeah, I've got to make the fingerboard. Don't want to forget about that. Well, when this winds down, I'm going to be posting some videos of another project I've been doing concurrently down in Bath, also called the City of Ships. For several years I've been volunteering on a project building a replica of a ship built in Maine in 1607. And I'm the guy that ends up working outdoors beside the river, probably because I'm the only one that admits they know how to use an axe. And in the last 3 years I've made the mainmast, the mizzenmast, some spars, a sweep, the rudder, and right now I'm finishing up the windlass barrel. I hope you'll join me for that. If you want to keep track of all the happenings here at Harper's Wood, go on over to patreon.com/harperswood and become a patron. Patrons get early access to these videos and some exclusive content. Thanks for watching. See you next time.